He woke up in a forest, but not according to the worn-out template that often happens in books, where the hero falls from the sky, remembers his past life, immediately grabs a sword and starts philosophizing. He simply opened his eyes, lying face down in the damp grass, and for several seconds understood absolutely nothing. First, there was the smell of wet earth, rotten leaves, tree resin. Then sound somewhere high above, a bird was screaming. Something was quickly running along the branches, and very close by, slightly to the left, water was dripping. Then the body came. Pain in his shoulders, a numb palm, a scratch on his cheek. He sat up. The forest was dense, dark, tall. The trees stood so close together as if they were deliberately blocking the view. No roads, no signs, no cities. Only forest, silence, and the feeling that he had ended up very far from everything familiar. He did not remember how he had gotten here. And that was the worst of all. His name did not surface right away either. Then in a fragment, like a word on the tongue that you cannot catch for a long time. Lin. Yes, Lin. He slowly rose to his feet and first of all examined himself. Simple clothes, strange to his memory, but comfortable. A short tunic, rough trousers, soft leather boots. A leather belt at his waist. No weapon, no belongings. He stood there and understood only one thing. He had to move. If you do not know where you are, first look for people. Then water, then shelter. This was not knowledge from this world. It was common sense. Lin walked. For the first 2 hours, he simply walked. The forest did not change. Trees, bushes, moss, roots. Somewhere far away, something large, gray-brown, flashed by, and Lin instantly stopped. But the creature disappeared before he understood what it was. Possibly a deer. Possibly something else. He did not check. Half an hour later, he found a stream. Small, clean, with cold water. Lin drank, washed his face, and sat down on a stone nearby. Only then did it begin to sink in how strange all of this was. He did not understand where he was. Did not understand how he had gotten here. Did not even understand whether there were people here. And yet there was one more strange fact. It seemed to him that he was being watched. At first it was just a feeling, then a rustle. Not one. Several. Light crackles of branches somewhere behind his back. Too quiet to be accidental, too regular not to notice. Lin did not turn around immediately. He sat pretending to drink water and thought. If he was being watched, then someone was there. If someone was there, he was not alone. If he was not alone, he needed not to panic. He got up and walked on as if he had noticed nothing, but now he was already listening. The rustle repeated, then again, and then Lin understood. It was not an animal. Animals move differently, too carefully, too evenly. A person was following him. Lin did not run. That would have been stupid. If you are being followed and you run, the one following you will immediately understand that you notice the surveillance. And if the person is cautious, he will either hide or attack from an advantageous position. Lin chose something else. He pretended to keep walking, but slightly changed his route. He came out into a small clearing where the trees stood more sparsely and the ground was covered with tall grass. Then he stopped by a fallen trunk, crouched down as if trying to catch his breath. He gave himself 2 minutes. Then he sharply stepped to the side, went around a tree, and hid behind the bushes. Waiting was hard. His heart beat slowly but heavily. His hands were damp. His head was empty and at the same time too full of thoughts. And then movement. A small figure cautiously stepped out into the clearing, looking around. Lin saw only a silhouette. Short, thin, with something like a long cloak made of hides. The figure stopped where he had just been sitting and began turning its head. Lin did not understand who it was, a man or a woman. But he understood that the moment had come. He jumped. The person in the clearing did not even have time to cry out. Lin knocked him off his feet, pinned him to the ground, and tore a short spear made of bone and wood from his hands. For a second they struggled. Then the figure froze. Lin pressed the stranger down harder and only now saw the face. It was a girl, very young, maybe his age. Her hair was dark, braided into rough plaits. She wore a strange primitive outfit. Leather, fur, bones as ornaments, straps tied around her waist and shoulders. But what surprised him most were her eyes, wary, angry, frightened all at once. She said something sharply and quickly. Lin did not understand a single word. She tried to break free. He held her, and then the girl spoke again, louder now, almost shouting. The language was strange, but familiar. Very familiar. Lin froze. He did not understand everything, but he grasped the meaning. As if her speech was close to his native one, only some sounds had changed, some words were mixed up, and some endings were different. The girl continued speaking, and Lin began to distinguish individual words. Let go. Now. Father. King. You will die. He blinked. King? He repeated aloud. The girl stopped resisting for a second, stared at him, and again quickly said something. Lin suddenly understood. She was not simply threatening him. She really believed that he had done something terrible, and he also understood that perhaps he should not be too rough with her. Lin slowly loosened his grip and stepped back. The girl immediately crawled backward, raised the spear, and pointed it at him. Lin raised his hands. Calmly, he said. She frowned. You speak our language? The words were strange, broken, but the meaning was clear. Lin slowly nodded. A little. The girl became even more wary. Who are you? He stayed silent. What do you answer a person if you yourself do not know where you are? Lin, he finally said, pointing at himself. My name is Lin. She repeated it cautiously as if tasting the name. Lin. Stranger? He nodded. Looks like it. She narrowed her eyes. You were following me? Lin spread his hands. I think it was the other way around. The girl flared up as if he had insulted her personally. I was not following. I was checking. Checking what? Whether you are dangerous. Lin looked at her carefully. She carried herself with a confidence surprising for her age. Not like a servant, not like a fugitive, like a person who was used to being obeyed. And this finally came together in his head. She was not just a girl from the forest. She was from a tribe. And judging by her words, this tribe considered her someone important. You said? Father King, Lin said cautiously. The girl straightened up as if it were self-evident. Yes, Father King of the Hara tribe? Lin blinked. Tribe? Yes, tribe. A large tribe. She looked at him with irritation again. And you are still standing there asking stupid questions. Better tell me, are you a warrior, a hunter, or a thief? Lin answered honestly, neither one nor the other. She stared at him as if that was the worst possible confession. Then you are useless. Thank you. That is not a thank you. Lin unexpectedly smirked. The girl did not appreciate his laughter. She frowned and abruptly stood up. I would take you to my father. He will decide what to do with you. Right now? Yes. And if I refuse? She raised the spear. Then I will hit you on the head and carry you anyway. Lin looked at the spear, then at her. Understood. She was slightly embarrassed by his calmness, but quickly hid it. Let's go, and do not try to run. Lin nodded. Because firstly, there was nowhere to run. And secondly, if she really was the king's daughter, then that could explain where he had ended up. And that was already something. They walked for a long time. The girl did not say her name right away. Only when the forest became thinner and the first signs of human life appeared on the horizon, smoke, chopped down trunks, a path, did she throw over her shoulder. My name is Yara. Lin repeated. Yara. She nodded. Remembered it. Yes. While they walked, Lin tried to understand her speech better. With every hour, it became more understandable, as if he really had once heard this language. He began to catch patterns. This word, it seemed, meant go. This one, father. This one, stranger. Some things matched his language almost completely. Others were distorted. This did not help him understand why, but it helped him not feel completely lost. Yara sometimes glanced back at him as if checking whether he had run away, but Lin simply walked silently. Finally, they came out to a settlement. It was not just a village, rather a large tribal settlement, surrounded by a palisade of thick trunks. The houses were long, low, made of wood, clay, and hides. In the center was an open square with a fire. People walked back and forth, carried water, repaired nets, sharpened bones and stones. Lin was noticed immediately. The people at the gate froze. One guard quickly called someone inside. Several children ran out to look. Women stopped with baskets. Yara proudly lifted her chin. I brought a stranger. The people around began to murmur. Lin felt dozens of eyes on him and already understood that this was a bad situation. If they considered him a threat, everything would end quickly. And indeed, a few minutes later, a man came out to them. Tall, broad-shouldered, with ornaments made of fangs and bronze plates. His face was hard, his gaze the same. This was clearly a man of power. In a tribe, power is visible immediately, by the way space clears around him. Yara immediately said loudly, Father! So this was the king of the Hara tribe. He looked at Lin as if he were dirt on his spear. The king did not ask who he was, where he was from, or what he was doing near his daughter. He simply raised his hand and said, Kill him. Lin did not even have time to be surprised. 4 warriors immediately moved forward with spears. Yara sharply stepped between them. "No!" The king frowned. "Step aside, daughter. He did not attack me. He is a stranger. He may be useful." Lin looked at them and for the first time truly understood how different everything was here. No courts, no conversations. Stranger means threat. Threat means death. Yara looked at her father with the same anger with which she had recently looked at Lin. "I caught him myself," she said loudly. "He does not know our way, does not know our laws. He is not a hunter and not a warrior. He is worth nothing dead. But alive he may bring benefit." The king sharply turned to her. "You are defending him? I am suggesting a reasonable solution. You forget yourself." "No, I am thinking." The square became quiet. Lin stood and understood. His life was being decided right now, and nothing depended on him. The king slowly looked Lin over from head to toe, then looked at his daughter again. And what benefit could there possibly be from this stranger? Yara did not back down. "He can speak our language, almost the same as we do. But he is not from the tribe. He came from outside. He may know more than he says, and if he does not know, he can be forced to work. Let him be a slave. A living slave." That made Lin freeze. A slave. The king also fell into thought. Was that better than death? Not for Lin, but for the king, yes. The people of the tribe began to whisper. One old man said something about a gift, another that a stranger could bring misfortune. Someone agreed with Yara, someone with the king. Finally, the ruler said, "He will live." Lin exhaled almost imperceptibly. But the king was not finished. As a slave. Yara calmly nodded, as if that was exactly what she had been trying to achieve. But Lin saw she was not indifferent either. She simply knew how to hide emotions better than many adults. The king looked at him. "You will not be killed, for now, but you will work. And if you try to run away, you will die." Lin nodded. He had no other choice. Slaves in the Hara tribe were not in chains. This surprised Lin most of all. They were not put in shackles, not locked in iron. But they were watched. They were not allowed to leave the settlement. They were given the hardest work. They were not called by name, but by role. Stone, water, wood, earth. Lin was given work at the construction site. He stayed silent, observed, and drew conclusions. The settlement clearly lacked order. The houses were built differently by different people without a common system. The paths were crooked. Supplies were stored in a disorganized way. People wasted time on repeated actions that could have been simplified. Tools lay wherever. No one consistently counted time and resources. Lin understood. The tribe lived by strength, but not by organization. It was a whole, and wholes could be used. In the evening, he was given a bowl of thick stew and a piece of tough meat. Lin sat at the edge of the square, ate slowly, and listened to people talking. He could already understand almost everything. Not perfectly, but enough. They talked about the catch, about the neighboring tribe, about how the hunting season would be hard. Someone cursed over a broken spear. Someone discussed Yara, too smart, too stubborn, all like her father. Lin listened and remembered. Then he noticed that someone was walking toward him. It was Yara. She sat down opposite him without ceremony, stared at the bowl, then at him. "You are a strange slave." Lin shrugged. "Thank you? That is not a thank you. I will remember." She snorted, then suddenly asked, "Where did you come from?" Lin fell silent. He himself did not know what to answer. To tell the truth meant admitting that he did not know. That was already the truth. But perhaps not the kind of truth they would understand here. "I woke up in the forest," he said, and remembered nothing. Yara frowned. "Absolutely nothing, almost. And the language? I know it, but not completely." She looked at him with suspicion, but no longer with the previous anger. "You are not like an ordinary stranger, and you are not like an ordinary king's daughter." She narrowed her eyes. "Careful. I can change my mind and tell my father that you are useless." Lin looked at her calmly. "Then you will have to look for another slave who knows how to listen and think." She could not hold back and smirked. It was the first small change. Lin noticed it. The next day, the first useful event happened. One of the builders dropped a beam, and the entire structure they were trying to build for storing grain almost collapsed. The tribe was going to repair everything all over again, shouting and cursing. Lin looked at the tilted support, then at the fastening, then at the roof, and understood that the problem was obvious. He raised his hand. "May I?" Everyone fell silent. The senior master builder stared at him. "You are a slave. You only know how to carry." Lin pointed at the beam. "If it is secured here and here, the load will be distributed differently. Then the support will not shift to the side." The people around exchanged glances. Someone smirked. Someone said, "Listening to a slave is a bad idea." Yara stood nearby with her spear and looked at Lin with curiosity. "Show us," she said. This turned out to be more important than any order. Because when the king's daughter says, "Show us," others no longer laugh so confidently. Lin came closer, quickly examined the structure, and began explaining in simple words where to place an additional prop. He did not know the local terms, so he simply showed with his hands. One of the old men grumbled at first, but then understood the scheme and fell silent. When they fixed everything, the structure really did become stronger. The people exchanged glances. One of them quietly said, "The stranger knows how to build." From that moment on, they began to look at him differently. Lin did not pretend that it was a coincidence. He understood that this was a chance. If you want to survive in a new world, first become useful. Not necessarily loved, not necessarily free, but useful, definitely. He began to notice other things too. Bad water channels. Heat left the houses too quickly. Food was stored incorrectly. People lost a lot of time on disorderly transitions between tasks. The hunt was carried out without a system. Weapons were made well, but the amount of defective work was too high because there was no single standard. Lin did not suggest everything right away. First he watched, then checked. Only then spoke. Ara observed him with interest. She came more and more often, sometimes with questions about the forest, sometimes with conversations about other tribes. Sometimes she simply sat nearby while he worked. "Why do you think all the time?" she asked once. Lin did not look up from his work. "Because otherwise I would die quickly. You are strange. You already said that." "I say it differently every time." He smirked. "And why do you come?" She looked at him without embarrassment. "Because my father considers you a slave. That means no one will listen to you except me. And I am interested in what you will say next." Lin nodded. It was honest. And honesty is the best foundation for trust, even if at first the trust is tiny. 2 weeks later, the king summoned him himself. It was unexpected. Lin walked into the main tent with a straight back, but inside he was still tense. One wrong answer and everything would end. The king sat by the fire. Beside him were 3 senior warriors and 1 priestess. Yara stood behind her father, arms crossed. The king looked at Lin for a long time. "You built the granary." "Yes, they say it is stronger now." "Yes, they say you fixed the water drain." "Yes, they say you asked too many questions." Lin thought for a second. "That is true." One of the warriors snorted, but the king raised his hand. "Why?" "Because I do not understand how everything is arranged among you." "And what, have you understood already?" "No, but I have begun." The king was silent. The priest beside him quietly whispered something, but the ruler ignored it. Then the king asked, "Why are you even alive, stranger?" The tent became quiet. Lin had not expected such a question, but the answer came at once, so as not to disappear. The king narrowed his eyes. "And that is all?" "For now, yes." It was an honest answer, very honest, and for some reason that was exactly what worked. The king was silent for some time, then said, "You are not a coward." Lin did not answer. Yara behind him smiled almost imperceptibly. The king continued, "You are useful, but remember, you are a slave. Your head belongs to me." Lin nodded. "I understand. And if you become even more useful, I will think about what to do with you next." It was not a merciful order. It was the first crack in the wall. Lin felt it. Winter came quickly to the Hara tribe. The cold grew stronger. Hunting became harder. People began spending more strength on survival. Several families were sick. In one of the distant camps, the supply of dried meat was running out. The king was nervous. Lin saw it. And right then he did something that changed everything. He proposed a system of storage and distribution. Not immediately, not loudly, not with a speech. He simply once showed how meat could be divided so that it would keep longer, then explained how to dry it in thin strips. Then he suggested setting up a common storehouse instead of leaving supplies separately with each family, then marking who received how much and how much they returned. At first, people resisted. They had never done it that way. Why count? If we leave it shared, someone will steal. The stranger does not know our customs. Lin did not argue emotionally. He showed the result. After a month, the food lasted longer. After 2, they quarreled less. After 3, they had a free resource. Everyone noticed it, even the king. Yara was the first to say it aloud. "You are changing the tribe." Lin looked at her. A little. No, a lot. She said it without fear, without doubt. And for the first time, there was not only curiosity in her voice, but also respect. And then something unexpected happened. One night, the settlement was attacked. The attackers came from the northern forest, another tribe, old enemies. The signal cries raised the people too late. Lin woke from the noise, ran outside, and saw fire. Shouts, smoke, men with spears, women leading children away, guards who did not have time to regroup. The king was already in armor and shouting orders. Yara stood with a spear at the main entrance. Lin understood at once. If everything went as usual now, the tribe would lose many people. And then he began to think not like a fugitive, but like a person who could organize. "Take the children to the western houses," he shouted. "Not all at once, in groups of 5, hunters to the outer line. Do not fight in a crowd." At first, no one listened to him. Then one warrior shouted, "He is right! Do what he says!" It was Yara. She shouted the order louder and the people immediately moved. Lin was already running to the spear storage. He quickly understood where the weak point of the attack was. The enemies were coming through a narrow passage between the houses, and if a barrier was created there, their movement could be broken. He was not the strongest fighter, but he knew how to see structure. He told 2 men to overturn heavy carts and block the passage. Then he shouted, "Set fire to the wet grass on this side. The smoke will go into their eyes." Someone obeyed, and suddenly the chaos became organized. Not perfectly, not beautifully, but organized. The enemies began to lose momentum. The king saw this and for the first time looked at Lin not as a slave, but as someone who could decide the outcome of a battle. Lin did not rush forward thoughtlessly. He was not a hero for whom a sword was enough. He worked where he was useful, directed, distracted, closed passages, shouted orders, suggested where to strike. And it was exactly this that saved several lives. By the end of the battle, the enemies retreated. The tribe survived. When it was all over, Lin stood in the smoke, breathing heavily, and suddenly realized that everyone was looking at him. King Hera came out to him slowly. He was wounded in the shoulder, but he stood straight. He looked at Lin for a long time. Then he said, "Today you are not just a slave." Lin did not answer. The king looked back at his people, then at him again. "Today you saved part of my tribe." Yara stood nearby and looked at him as if only now had she understood who he really was. The king was silent for a moment and added, "Tomorrow we will speak again." The next day, Lin was not shackled, not punished, and not sent to carry stones. He was summoned to the king's tent. This time only the king and Yara were there. The ruler looked tired. He was silent for a long time, then said, "You know how to build. You know how to count. You know how to see weak spots. And yesterday you saved people." Lin stood straight. "Yes, you remain a slave by my law." Lin nodded. "But I will give you a new position." Yara turned to him. The king continued, "Not a slave, not a warrior, not a guest. Advisor for works and supplies. You will be responsible for construction, storage, food distribution, and order in the settlement." Lin did not believe it right away. "Why?" he finally asked. The king looked straight at him. "Because you are useful, and because the tribe must become stronger, not only fight." It was almost an admission. Almost. But for a beginning, that was enough. Yara slowly smiled. "I told you he could be useful." The king cast a glance at her. "You have been right too often." She did not become embarrassed. It runs in the family. For the first time in a long time, Lin felt that beneath his feet there appeared not just ground, but a path. Long, difficult, unclear, but a path. That evening, Lin sat by the fire for a long time and looked at the settlement. The people around still lived hard lives. The cold was still there. Enemies still existed. The tribe could still fall apart from one mistake. But now he had a point of support. Not strength, not a sword, not a title, influence. And Yara noticed it first. She came over with a cup of hot decoction and sat beside him. "You are an important person now," she said. Lin smirked. "Just a little, do not lie. Father already listens to you, he listens to the result. That is almost the same thing." Lin looked at the fire. "And what now?" Yara was silent for a moment, then said, "Now you must make our tribe stronger than the others." Lin turned to her. "Only ours?" She tilted her head slightly, and why not? He did not answer right away, because a thought was already being born in his head, dangerous and large. If one tribe could be made stronger, then 2 could be made stronger as well, and 3, and 10. If one learns to build, count, organize, negotiate, distribute, and defend, then a tribe will stop being just a group of people surviving in the forest. Then a tribe will become a state. Lin looked into the fire and understood. This was only the beginning. And somewhere beyond the forest lived other tribes. There were more of them. They were stronger. They did not know that soon a stranger would appear, one who knew how to do what they could not. A stranger who had once become a slave. A stranger who had caught the king's daughter. A stranger who did not yet know that from this very moment began the path to power over the entire continent. And Yara sat beside him, like the first person in the new world who was not afraid of his future. Half a year had passed since the night when Lin first saved the Hara tribe. During that time, much had changed. Not immediately, not sharply, but enough that even the most stubborn began to notice. The stranger was not just useful, he was changing the very way the tribe lived. Now there was not one large granary in the settlement, but 3. Hunting was carried out according to a schedule. Supplies were distributed according to lists. Houses began to be built not however each person wanted, but according to a common scheme to preserve heat. Separate places appeared for workshops, storehouses, healing, and cooking. People grumbled at first, then got used to it. Then began to notice that there were fewer hungry people, fewer quarrels too, and surviving became easier. King Hera did not admit this aloud, but listened to Lin more and more often. Yara watched him more and more attentively with every month. At first she came simply out of curiosity, then to argue, then to discuss matters. Now almost every day. And Lin noticed that something strange had arisen between them. Not friendship, not trust in the full sense. Rather a constant tension that did not interfere, but on the contrary, made him think about the other person almost all the time. This irritated Lin. Yara, it seemed, noticed this and enjoyed it. "You are silent again," she said one evening when they were sitting by the new storehouse built according to his scheme. "I am thinking. You already said that. That means I think often. Or you simply do not know how to talk to people except about timber and supplies." Lin looked at her. "And do you only know how to speak in barbs?" "Yes, that is my strength," he snorted. She smiled. Lin did not only build, he began to teach the young. First, simple things. How to count supplies, how to divide duties, how to notice weak points in food storage. Then how to read animal tracks, how to set traps not chaotically, but systematically, how to build small shelters in case of bad weather. Some teenagers listened with interest, some with distrust. But children always learn faster than adults if they see the benefit. One of the boys, long-armed and too thin, whose name was Tech, once said, "You speak as if you had already been a chief." Lin did not answer right away. "I was no one," he said later. "That is why I know how to stop being no one." This pleased many, not everyone of course. The old warriors treated him suspiciously, especially those who were used to considering strength the only currency. They believed that Lin was making the tribe too soft, and such talk was becoming louder and louder. One day a senior warrior named Rag came to the king's large tent. He was massive, with a rough face and a nose that had once been broken. Rag had always been dissatisfied with Lin and did not hide it. "King," he said directly, "people think too much about supplies and too little about enemies. The stranger has made us lazy." The king sat silently. Yara stood nearby, arms crossed. Lin was there too. He had been called for a discussion about distributing meat after the winter hunt. Rag pointed his finger at Lin. "He teaches weakness." Lin looked at him calmly. "I teach how to survive longer. That is the same thing for cowards." Yara sharply stepped forward. "Careful." Rag smirked. "The king's daughter now protects a slave?" "I protect reason," she cut him off. The king raised his hand. Silence. Then he looked at Lin. "Answer for yourself. Why should we listen to you and not Rag?" Lin did not start arguing about strength. He understood that this was a trap for simple people. If you start proving that you are smarter, they will call you soft. If you start shouting, they will call you weak. If you stay silent, you have lost. So he said it differently. Because when the tribe eats well, it can send out more hunters and lose fewer people. Because when houses are built correctly, children and old people do not freeze in them. Because when supplies are counted, you do not starve in a bad season. This is not weakness. This is a reserve of strength. Rag smirked. "A reserve of strength is a spear." "No," Lin said. "It is people. If you lose one warrior to hunger or cold, your enemy will attack you anyway. If you keep 10 people alive through order, you already have more spears than the one who simply boasted of strength." The king looked at him for a long time, then asked, "Do you always think like that?" "Yes, even when you are beaten." Lin did not blink. "Especially then." Yara smirked almost imperceptibly. Rag wanted to say something else, but the king interrupted him. "Enough! I have heard enough." He looked at Lin. "Keep working. And you, Rag, will make sure that the warriors listen to him in household matters." Rag turned crimson, but he did not dare argue. Lin understood an important thing then. Power does not always win by shouting. Sometimes it simply holds the pause longer than the others. In spring, guests came, not enemies, not yet. It was the Sorg tribe, neighbors who lived to the south. They sent 3 people with gifts, dried meat, hides, and a well-crafted stone knife. In exchange, they asked to trade for salt and hunting advice. King Hera was wary but accepted them. Lin understood at first glance that this was not simple courtesy. This was reconnaissance. The Sorg had come to check whether the Hara tribe had changed after the strange stranger. Yara noticed his look. What? They are not simply trading. What else? They are looking at how strong you are and how useful you can be. Yara looked at the guests more attentively. Do you think they want an alliance? Not yet. First, an assessment. And what should we do? Lin answered calmly. Show order, not strength for the sake of strength. She nodded. This became the first test of his new system. The guests were shown the storehouses, they were shown the workshops, they were shown how meat was distributed. They were shown drying frames and water collectors. They were shown the new houses where children were no longer crushed by the cold in winter. The people of the Hara tribe were nervous at first, but Lin had explained to them in advance that the calmer they were, the stronger an impression it would make. Yara helped him silently and quickly. When the guests of the Sorg tribe left, one of them, an elder man with a long braid, lingered at the gate and said to King Hera, "The spirit of your settlement has changed." The king did not answer, but Lin noticed how his eyebrow moved slightly. In the evening, the king called Lin separately. "Speak." Lin immediately understood what the question was about. They are comparing us with others. And they want to understand whether we can become partners or a threat. The king looked at him for a long time. You have made us more useful, yes? Is that good or bad? Lin did not answer right away. At first good, later dangerous, because strong tribes always attract attention. The king nodded. Then it is time to learn to be not merely strong. Lin looked at him with interest. But what? The king was silent for a moment, then said, "We need to be those who cannot be broken." It was the first real admission. Lin remembered those words. He began speaking with Yara more often. She was still sarcastic, but now something else was mixed into it. Respect, almost unnoticeable at first glance. One evening they were walking along the palisade. "Do you know that people are already arguing about you?" she asked. "About what exactly? Some think you are dangerous, others that you are useful. A third group that father will soon make you free." Lin snorted. And which of them is right? Yara stopped. Probably all of them. He looked at her. And what do you think? She did not answer right away. Usually she answered quickly. That already meant the question was important. "I think you came here not by chance." Lin froze. Why? Because too much has coincided. You appeared when the settlement was on the edge. You know how to do what we do not. You are not afraid to argue with father. And you. She faltered for a second. You do not look at me as the king's daughter. Lin did not know what to answer. She stepped closer and added more quietly. Usually everyone either fears me or tries to please me. You do neither one nor the other. And what do I do? Yara looked straight at him. You treat me like a person. It was a simple phrase, but for some reason it sounded stronger than any confession. Lin looked away. Because that is what you are, a person. Yara smiled slightly. That is why you are dangerous. In the middle of summer, the first great misfortune happened. The river, on which half the life of the tribe depended, overflowed after heavy rains. Part of the traps was carried away, 2 crossings were destroyed, the lower storehouses were flooded. Several people almost drowned. The meat supplies got wet. Work stopped for several days. It was a blow. People began to panic. Someone had already started talking about it being a bad sign. Rag once again began grumbling that the stranger brought not order, but misfortune. Lin did not argue, he acted. He divided people into groups, one to save the dry supplies, the second to strengthen the bank, the third to restore the paths to the drying sheds, the fourth to build temporary walkways. He did not do everything himself, and that was the key. Before, the tribe acted as a crowd, now as teams. Yara helped on the bank, soaked to the bone, angry and collected. You should not have been right so often, she shouted to Lin when another board fell into place. He, wet and angry too, shouted back. Would you have preferred that I was wrong? No, but it is annoying. He laughed. So did she. Even in disaster, there was something living, strong, real between them. By evening, they had managed. The tribe did not lose people. It lost part of its supplies, yes, but not everything. And most importantly, it saw that a crisis could be survived. After that, no one dared say that Lin brought only misfortune anymore. King Hera began to treat Lin differently after the flood. He did not declare him free immediately. That would have been too sharp a step, and the king understood that. But he did something that in their world meant no less. He gave Lin a personal tent, assigned him 2 assistants. allowed him to walk freely around the settlement without supervision, and most importantly, began calling him not as a slave, but as an advisor. Everyone noticed it, and one evening the king said in front of Yara and several elders, "Lin does not belong to the ground, like a slave. But he does not belong to us like an ordinary person either. He must serve the tribe not with a chain, but with a word." It was almost freedom. Almost. Lin understood. The king did not like letting go of control. He only did what he considered useful, but even that was a step forward. Yara later told him directly, "Father is testing you. I know, and if you disappoint him, he will turn you back into work, not a person." Lin nodded. "I understand." She looked at him. "Do not be afraid. You have already done too much for them to simply remove you." Lin snorted. Doubtful comfort, but honest. In autumn, the king called him to the tent one-on-one. It was unexpected and important. Lin entered, bowed. The king sat by the fire. On the table lay a map, rough, drawn by Lin's hands several months ago, and now corrected with local marks. The king raised his head. "You know that people already call you by different names." Lin tensed. What exactly? Stranger, builder, advisor, Lin's slave. Lin stayed silent. The king continued. "I do not like the word slave in this connection. It has begun to interfere with the matter." And here Lin understood. Something important was about to happen. The king stood up. "From today you are not a slave." Lin did not believe it right away. "What? You are no longer a slave." Yara, standing at the entrance, froze. The king continued. "But you remain under my protection and in my service. This is not freedom in foreign lands. This is freedom in the Hara tribe." Lin felt everything inside him stop. He had waited for this for half a year, but when it happened, he did not know what to feel. "Why?" he asked quietly. The king looked straight at him. "Because you have brought the tribe more benefit than many of my warriors. And because if I want you to build me a future, I cannot keep you as a thing." Lin did not answer right away. Then he slowly lowered himself to one knee, not as a slave, but as a person making a decision. "I will serve the Hara tribe." The king nodded. "Good." Yara turned away slightly to hide her emotions, but Lin still noticed that she smiled. After liberation, life did not become easier, it became more complicated. Because now Lin was no longer just a useful stranger. He became a person who could influence the fate of the tribe directly, and that meant responsibility. The king began consulting him on questions of neighbors, trade, defense, and construction of new houses. Rag still grumbled. The young warriors began to respect him more. The old people became more cautious. The women became calmer because with his system of food and housing, life became easier. As for Yara, she became different beside him. Not softer, no. But she more often looked at him for a long time and silently, as if trying to understand how a person could be so calm and so dangerous at the same time. One day at sunset, she asked, "What do you want next?" Lin did not answer right away. Now that he was free, the question sounded different. First, to make the tribe stronger, and then? He looked at the line of the horizon, then to understand why I ended up here at all. Yara was silent. "And if this continent consists of dozens of tribes that live in fear, hunger, and constant war?" He continued quietly. "Then someone must change it." She turned to him. "You speak as if you want to unite everyone." Lin thought for a second, and then answered very calmly, "Perhaps that is exactly so." Yara looked at him for a long time, then said, "You are insane, perhaps, and that is frightening." "For the enemies, yes." She smirked. And at that moment, Lin understood for the first time. She was not just the daughter of the tribe's king. She was the first person of this world who had begun walking beside him, not because she had to, but because she chose to. And that was more dangerous than any oath. By winter, new guests came to the Hara tribe. This time not with reconnaissance, not with a gift, with a request. The Sorg tribe, those same neighbors who had previously only been observing, came for help. They had begun an internal famine after the drought, and more importantly, nomadic hunters from the east were pressing on their lands. King Hera received them in the large tent. Lin stood nearby, Yara too. The senior envoy of the Sorg tribe, a thin man with a gray face, lowered his head and said, "We ask for exchange. Grain for protection. Food for order." The king looked at Lin. Lin slightly lowered his head and quietly said, "If we help them now, they will remember it their whole lives. And perhaps one day they will help us." The king was silent for a moment, then slowly nodded. "Tell them. The Hara tribe will help." The envoy did not believe it right away. Just like that? The king looked at Lin, then at Yara, then at the elder warriors. Not just like that, he finally said. This is how a strength begins that outlives one winter. Lin looked at him and understood. This was no longer just a tribe. This was already a movement. Yara, standing nearby, quietly said to him, "It seems you have started changing the world after all." Lin looked at the fire in the center of the tent. It seemed so. Outside the walls, the wind howled. Snow beat against the palisade, but inside it was warm. And somewhere ahead, a new story was already beginning. The story of uniting tribes, a road across the continent, and a man who had once woken up in the forest as a stranger, and now was only beginning to understand what it meant to become a ruler. After helping the Sorg tribe, much changed. At first unnoticeably, then faster and faster. The Hara people began to say, if there is now an ally, then one does not have to fear only the forest. If one neighbor asks for help and receives it, then it is not weakness, but strength. If a tribe has supplies, order, and a person who knows how to solve things not only with his hands, but also with his head, it is no longer simply surviving. They were becoming something greater. Lin felt it every day. He no longer worked like a stranger by the fire. Now he sat beside the king at councils, drew schemes, assigned people to tasks, argued with senior warriors, and checked the storehouses. Yara was still beside him, sometimes as an observer, sometimes as an opponent in argument, sometimes as a person who simply came to sit nearby when the day had turned out too hard. And Lin understood that it was with her that speaking was easiest for him. Not because she was soft. On the contrary, she was direct, stubborn, and sometimes too sarcastic. But beside her, there was no need to pretend to be someone else. One evening, when the two of them were checking the new storehouse by the northern wall, Yara asked, "Are you happy?" Lin even stopped moving the boxes. Why such a question? You work as if you constantly need to get somewhere in time. He shrugged. Habit. That is not an answer. What kind is needed? Yara looked at him attentively, a real one. Lin was silent for several seconds. "I do not know," he said honestly. "I stopped living in a way that made me think about happiness long ago. First I had to survive, then become useful, then help the tribe, and now I do not know." Yara sat down on a box beside him. And if all of that had already been done, Lin thought, then probably I would for the first time start thinking about what I myself want. She smiled slightly. That is almost an answer already. In spring, bad news came. The Nor tribe, large and harsh, moved south. They were not looking for negotiations, they were looking for territory. Their hunters were already seizing old trails, and several small groups had disappeared. The Hara tribe was not the only one who felt the threat. The elders became alarmed. The warriors began arguing more often. Supplies began to be distributed in case of a siege. The Sorg people sent a messenger with a request for a meeting. King Hera again called Lin to the council. "The Nor tribe is coming toward us," he said. Lin looked at the map he had once drawn himself, and now it was covered with new marks. "Not only toward us," he answered, "they are pressing everyone nearby. If they are not stopped, they will push out the weak and take the pastures." Rag, sitting nearby, crossed his arms. "So, war?" "Possibly," Lin said. "Good," Rag answered grimly. "At last you speak like a man." Yara rolled her eyes. Lin looked at the map. "Do not rush to rejoice. War is not only spears. They have more people. If we fight only head-on, we will lose." The king asked, "What do you suggest?" Lin looked at the marks for a long time. "An alliance." The hall became quiet. "With whom?" the king asked. "With the Sorg, Tel, and possibly the northern hunting groups. If we can gather several small tribes into one line, Nor will no longer be able to advance so confidently." Rag snorted. "And if they do not want to? Then we will persuade them." "How?" Lin looked at the king. "By action." This time Lin himself asked to go on the road. The king did not want to let him go alone, but Yara insisted. "The people need him more than in the tent," she said. "And if someone must speak on behalf of Hara, it is him." The king looked at her for a long time, then at Lin, then nodded briefly. "Take 5. So Lin set off with a small group to the Sorg tribe. With him were Yara, 2 hunters, 1 old interpreter named Ver, and a young warrior, Tek, that same thin boy who had long helped him with the schemes. The road was difficult. The weather changed. The forest became damp. Foreign tracks appeared. Not all were friendly. Lin understood. This was not simply a trip to the neighbors. This was the first real diplomatic journey of his life. If they failed, the alliance would fall apart. If they succeeded, something greater would begin. The Sorg tribe met them warily. The elder chief, a dry man named Kel, listened to Lin in silence, then was silent for a long time again. "You want us to unite with Hara?" he finally asked. "Yes, why should we trust you?" Lin did not start giving beautiful speeches. He simply answered, "Because we already helped you when you needed it. Because we did not come for your lands, and because if Nor passes through you, they will come to us too. It is better to build a line together than to be eaten one by one." Kel looked at him for a long time. "You speak like an old chief. I simply count the consequences." The old man glanced sideways at Yara. "And the king's daughter is still beside you?" Yara did not blink. "And you are still asking stupid questions?" Lin smirked slightly. Kel almost smiled too, but quickly hid it. "I will think." It was not a refusal. It was a good sign. On the way back, they fell into an ambush. Not a large army, not a full detachment. Only 12 men from Nor, well armed and fast. They were waiting for them on a narrow mountain path. The first seconds were dangerous. Tek got scared. One hunter almost slipped down. Yara immediately raised her spear. Lin quickly assessed the terrain, a slope on the left, a cliff on the right, a couple of trees higher up the path. If they blocked the way and broke the rhythm, the enemies would not be able to turn around. "To the tree," he shouted. "Do not stand in the center." He was no longer just giving advice, he was commanding. Yara noticed this first and understood without words what to do. She moved forward, covering him. Lin ordered Tek to gather stones from the edge of the path, the hunters to strike from above, Ver to cover the retreat downward. He himself, with 2 warriors, quickly organized a barrier of stones and snags. When the first enemies rushed forward, they immediately lost their advantage. Lin saw the one who seemed to be their leader and sharply shouted, "Now!" Stones flew down. One enemy fell, another lost his spear. A third rolled toward the cliff. Yara fought beside him fiercely and precisely as always, but now their movements matched almost without words. It was unexpected even for her. When the fight ended, they stood on the path among dust and blood. Tek was trembling. The hunter was breathing heavily. Lin wiped his forehead and looked down. The enemies had retreated. Yara looked at him. "Do you ever panic at all?" Lin answered honestly. "Yes, I just start thinking immediately after." She snorted. "That is almost the same as not panicking." "No, I simply know how to pretend." She laughed, and for a second there was something very warm in that laughter. When they returned to Hara, they were greeted differently now. Not as people who had simply gone to the neighbors, but as those who had returned after real danger. The king listened to the report and was silent for a long time. "So Nor is already striking at everyone," he finally said. "Yes," Lin answered, "and this is only the beginning." The king nodded. "Then the time has come for what?" The king looked straight ahead. "For an alliance." It was the word Lin had been waiting for a long time, but even then, he did not allow himself to rejoice too early. An alliance is not friendship. It is work. He began traveling between the tribes, Sorg, Hera, Tel. Small groups of hunters from the north, steppe people who lived on the border between the forest and the plains. Not everyone agreed at once, but if you have food, order, defense, and results, people begin to listen. Lin learned to speak at councils, learned to sort out disputes, learned to find common interest where everyone expected only benefit. Learned not only to build houses, but also to build trust. And it was during this period that Yara first said to him what he had not expected. "You are no longer just an advisor. Then what am I?" She looked at him for a long time. "You are becoming a chief." Lin was silent, then answered quietly, "I did not ask for this. No one asks. It comes when it is already too late to refuse." He looked at her. "That sounds frightening." "Because it is frightening." At the end of summer, King Hera called a general council. Representatives of 3 tribes and several small groups were there. Lin stood beside him when the king said, "From this day on, Lin is not merely an advisor. He will speak on my behalf in matters of alliances." The tent became quiet. It was not a title in the usual sense, but everyone understood. Lin received the right to conduct negotiations, make agreements, and change the order between tribes. Yara, standing slightly to the side, looked at him with the expression people have when they watch someone's path becoming too large for one person. After the council, she found him by the river. "Well then, great ruler?" she asked with her usual mockery. Lin snorted. "Do not start. I have not even begun yet." He sat down on a stone. Yara stood nearby. "You understand that now not only houses and food will depend on you, but other people's lives too? Yes, and you still want this?" Lin looked at the water for a long time. "I do not want it in the sense that people want something pleasant." "Then in what sense?" "In the sense that now I can no longer pretend that I simply survived, and that is all." if I have the chance to make the world better, and I do not do it, then why did I end up here at all? Yara was silent, then quietly said, "That is why I stayed beside you." Lin turned to her. She looked away as if she had said too much, but she did not step back. In autumn, a letter came from an unknown tribe beyond the northern swamps. Short, rough, but important. They asked for a meeting, not an alliance yet, no, not help yet either, only a meeting. And in the last line it was written, "We heard that the Hara tribe has a stranger who can build more than houses." Lin reread it 3 times. Yara, reading beside him, raised an eyebrow. "It seems stories are already being told about you." "Seems so. And what does that mean?" Lin slowly folded the letter. "It means the tribes are beginning to look beyond their borders. Is that good?" "Very. Dangerous?" "Extremely," she smiled. "Then it is time for you to go." Lin looked at her. "You are coming with me." It was not a question. Yara immediately answered, "Of course." Lin nodded. Because he had long understood, he did not pass the most important stages of the path alone. In the evening before departure, Lin stood on the high ground above the Hara settlement. Fires burned below. People cooked, laughed, argued. Children ran between the houses, warriors sharpened weapons. The storehouses were fuller than a year ago. The houses stood straighter. The order was not perfect, but already alive. And Lin suddenly understood that this was no longer simply a tribe. It was a foundation. What yesterday had been merely survival was today becoming a state. Still rough, tribal, unstable, but already moving towards something greater. Yara came over and stood beside him. "What are you thinking about?" Lin, without taking his eyes off the lights, looked on. "About how many more such settlements there are on this continent." "Many. And how many of them live as hard as we lived? Even more." He slowly nodded. "Then the path will be long." Yara looked at him. "For the first time, you said it as if you were ready." Lin smirked. "I am not ready." "And still you go." "Yes." She was silent for a moment, then said very quietly, "Me too." Lin turned to her. For the first time in a long time, he saw in her face not only boldness and strength, but also something more personal, deeper. But he said nothing, because it was not the time for words. It was the time for the road. The road north turned out to be harder than Lin had expected. Not because the way was too long, not because the lands were hostile, but because the north lived differently. There the air was damper, the ground softer, the fogs thicker, and the people more wary. Everything here seemed to say, strangers are not welcome. With Lin traveled Yara, 2 hunters from Hera, one of the Sorg people, and the old interpreter Ver. The letter they had received led them to the Keln Swamp, a vast, wet lowland where villages on stilts stood between hummocks and narrow paths. The people there wore fur, leather, and high boots. Their speech was rough with harsh endings, but Lin understood it already better than he had once on his first day in the forest. At the entrance to the settlement, they were met in silence. Then a man with white hair and a scar on his cheek came out. He was older than he seemed at first glance and looked as if he was used to settling disputes by force. "You are from Hera," he said. "Yes," Lin answered. "You are the stranger?" "Yes," the man looked at him for a long time. "I am Kavir, elder of the Swamp Council." Lin nodded. "I am Lin." Kavir snorted. "You know how to build?" "Yes." "You know how to count?" "Yes." "You know how not to lie about yourself?" Lin smirked slightly. "Sometimes." Yara beside him quietly snorted. Kavir almost smiled for the first time. "Good. Then let us go. We will see why you have come." In the council house, it was warm and damp at the same time. Nets, dried herbs, and several wooden masks painted black and red hung on the walls. Kavir sat opposite Lin and immediately got to the point. "We have a problem." "What kind?" "People are leaving. Not all at once. 2 at a time, 3 at a time. Then they do not return. At first we thought beasts, then foreign hunters, then sickness. But no. Someone is doing this deliberately." Lin straightened. "Are they disappearing only from 1 village?" "From 3. "Are there tracks?" "Almost none." "The swamp swallows everything." Yara frowned. "Abductions?" "Possibly," Kavir said. "Or recruitment." Or something worse, Lin thought. "Why did you write specifically to Hera?" Kavir looked straight at him. "Because rumors about you are already going farther than the south. They say you know how not only to build, but also to unite people. We need someone who will understand what is happening." This was more important than it might have seemed. Lin understood. This was not simply a request for help. It was a test. If he handled it, people would learn about him farther away. If not, the swamp would close back into silence. He nodded. I will look into it. Kaver snorted again. Not look into it. Figure it out. And if you find the guilty one, we will think about an alliance. Lin felt Yara beside him tense slightly. Alliance was now arising more and more often. This meant that the Hera tribe was already beginning to be perceived not as one settlement, but as the beginning of a force. Lin spent 3 days in the swamp villages. At first, he simply observed. People here lived tightly, but not poorly. The houses on stilts were old but well kept. Supplies were stored high so that the water would not take them. Guard fires burned at night by the paths. At first glance, everything looked normal, but not quite. Lin noticed that mostly young men and several women who knew how to walk through the swamps better than the others were disappearing. Not children, not old people. Exactly those who could be useful somewhere else. He began asking questions, not directly, carefully. Through food, through repairs, through exchange. And gradually he understood the main thing. Those who disappeared were the ones who complained about living conditions more often than others. Those who argued with the Swamp Council. Those who wanted change. And then Lin reached an unpleasant conclusion. They are not being kidnapped by beasts, he told Yara in the evening, and not by foreign hunters. Then who? Someone inside. She looked at him attentively. A traitor? Or someone who thinks he is taking the unneeded for something greater? Is that worse or better? Lin did not answer right away. Worse for the people. At night, he himself went along the path where the last person had disappeared. The swamp was dangerous. The fog thickened with every minute. Lin walked slowly, checking the hummocks with a stick. Yara walked beside him, she had insisted. If you fall through, I am not dragging you out, she said in advance. Thank you for the support. I am honest. He smirked. The trace was weak, but Lin saw it. Not a direct human footprint, that would have been too simple. He found a piece of cloth caught on a root. Then, off to the side, the mark of a drag. And finally, the barely noticeable smell of smoke and fat. There was a camp here, he said quietly. Recent? Yes. They examined the place. An extinguished fire, an empty water skin, a broken bone, and footprints leading toward drier ground. Lin crouched and touched the ground. They have not gone far. Who? He raised his head. People? And they are hiding something. The trail led them to an old tower on the water. Not a tower in a good sense, it was a huge council house, long abandoned, standing on thick wooden stilts in the wettest part of the swamp. Once fish and herbs had been stored there. Now the windows were boarded up and guards stood around it. Yara immediately understood. This is it. Lin nodded. Too many guards for an abandoned storehouse. They hid in the fog and watched. An hour later, one of the guards led 2 people with tied hands outside. Both were from the swamp villages. One walked by himself, the other could barely stand. Lin clenched his teeth. So we are right. The guards handed the prisoners inside. Lin looked into the windows. What are they doing there? Yara whispered. I do not know. But after just a minute, a strange sound came from inside, something like metal striking wood. Then another, and a smell. Burnt fat, grass, blood. Lin sharply looked at Yara. We need to get inside. Now? Yes, there are 3 of us against 7. 4 of us, she said quietly and pulled out her spear. Lin looked at her. I said 3. Do you consider yourself more important? What a pity. It was exactly in moments like these that he understood why it was easier to breathe beside her. They did not enter through the door. Lin found a side ladder leading to an old technical platform for boats. The wood was rotten, but it held. Inside the tower, it was dark and heavy. On the lower level stood a table, lamps, and several men. In the center of the room was a stone bowl with red paint. On the floor were marks that looked ritualistic. Lin crouched behind a beam and saw the main thing. The prisoners were not simply being held, they were being prepared. One of the men was drawing something on their arms. The second was reading a text. The third was checking knives. This is no longer just kidnappings, Yara whispered. No. Lin watched for a few more seconds and understood that they had no time for caution. When I say we strike quickly, we do not let them raise the alarm, understood, and do not kill if it is not necessary. She looked at him. You are too kind for war. No, I simply know that too many dead are worse than one enemy. She did not answer, but nodded. Lin inhaled. Now. They burst in quickly. Lin struck first, not with a sword, but with a heavy board, knocking one of the men off his feet. Yara rushed to the right, knocking the second down with her spear. The guards jumped up. One managed to shout, but Tech, who this time was also with them, jumped out from behind the beam and grabbed onto his arm. Everything happened very quickly. Lin noticed that one of the people in the room, the elder one with a tattoo on his neck, was trying to smash the stone bowl. He understood immediately. If this was a ritual, the bowl must not be destroyed. It needed to be taken. Left, he shouted to Yara. She rushed there, deflecting a blow. Lin grabbed the bowl with both hands and dragged it away from the table. At that moment, the elder with the tattoo shouted, "You do not understand what you are doing. The swamp must live." Lin sharply turned to him. "Through kidnappings? Through selecting the best? And what do you do with them?" The man cried out in pain when Yara knocked the knife from his hand, and then the truth began to flow out. It turned out that the council of the old part of the swamp villages had long ago decided the weak and argumentative had to be removed. The young and strong had to be taken secretly and sent to another place, where they were made into workers for a large center that no one was supposed to know about. Lin heard this and froze. "Center? What center?" The man spat blood. "They are building a new alliance there. Real power, not like yours." Lin felt everything inside grow cold. So someone is already building a union, but not like an alliance. Only after the interrogation did they understand who it was. Not one tribal council, not one swamp elder. Behind everything stood a man from the southern lands, a trader named Vault, who under the guise of exchange supplied several tribes with the same grains, fabrics, and metal. He bought loyalty. Somewhere with bread. Somewhere with weapons. Somewhere with fear. Lin listened attentively and asked questions one after another. Who serves him? Which tribes are already under him? Where is the center? Who is responsible for the rituals? How many people have disappeared? The answers formed a frightening picture. Vault was not simply trading, he was building hidden power. In the swamps, in the north, in the south. He was creating a network that could later swallow all the weak. Lin did not understand it right away, but as soon as he did, he immediately collected himself. "This is no longer a local disaster," he said quietly to Yara. "This is the beginning of a large system." She looked at him seriously. "And what will you do?" Lin raised his eyes. "I will tear it apart before it becomes too strong." The next day, they returned to the council house of the swamp people. Kavar listened to the report in silence. Then for a long time rubbed his face with his hands. "So the old council was rotten." "Yes," Lin said. "And you pulled them out?" "Yes." Kavar looked at him with a heavy gaze. "You came here as a stranger. Now you are tearing out our rot. If there is rot inside, it is better to pull it out." Kavar snorted. "You say that like a man who has already broken things many times and built them anew." Lin did not answer. Kavar stood up. "We will not let Vault get away unpunished, but we do not have the strength to enter open conflict. Then there is no need to go openly." Kavar narrowed his eyes. "Explain." Lin leaned over the table and began to draw. "You have 3 villages on stilts. There are channels that only the locals know. There are paths by which one can approach Vault's storehouses from the water. If we cut off the supplies, hide the people, and make him think that the swamp itself has begun to resist, he will be forced to come out of the shadows." Kavar listened very attentively. Yara beside him understood before the others. "You want to turn the swamp people into a resistance?" Lin nodded. "Yes, not a rebellion. A resistance. Organized." Kavar looked at him for several seconds, then suddenly said, "You are a dangerous man. I have already been told that. And that is exactly why I will help you." Lin stayed in the swamps for 2 weeks. He did what he knew how to do best. Turned chaos into a system. Divided people into groups, appointed observers, composed routes for water and cargo, marked alarm signals, taught the locals how to secretly lead people out at night through the boggy passages, set up false storehouses. He did not make them a chief, but he made them a people who could resist. Yara was beside him the entire time. They argued almost every day. "You want too much from people," she said. "No, I simply want them to stop dying meaninglessly. That sounds like the same thing." "No, yes." He looked at her and sighed tiredly. "Will you always argue? If you are wrong, yes, and if I am right, then anyway, just for form." Lin shook his head, and yet he liked it. When Vault arrived in the swamps personally, Lin understood. Everything had worked. The trader arrived with guards and 3 cargo boats. He looked confident, almost lazy. He thought everything was under control. That was the mistake. Lin ordered them not to attack immediately. First they allowed him to go deeper into the swamps, then they led him onto a false path. Then they blocked the exits. Only when Vault understood that he was surrounded was it too late. He stepped out onto a wooden platform above the water and saw not scattered swamp people, but an organized line. Kaver stood on the left, Lin in the center, Yara slightly behind with a spear in her hand. Vault laughed nervously. "Do you seriously think you can threaten me?" Lin looked at him calmly. "No, I think you have already lost." Vault sharply raised his hand and his guards reached for their weapons. But the platforms under them had already been weakened. Lin had ordered part of the supports replaced in advance. When panic began, one boat with cargo tilted sideways, the second caught on the reeds, the third lost control. Not an open slaughter, not a frontal attack, a disruption of control. This was something Lin was especially good at. Vault's people began to retreat. Someone jumped into the water. Someone surrendered immediately. Someone tried to run. Yara knocked the weapon from one guard's hands with her spear and threw Lin a short look, as if to say, "I will cover you." He nodded. Vault, seeing everything collapse, turned pale. "This is not the end yet," he shouted. Lin stepped forward. "No, this is only the beginning." When Vault was taken, the interrogation turned out to be the most important of all. It became clear that he really had been building a hidden center of power. Not a state, not an alliance, a system of subjugation. He wanted to gather the weakest tribes under himself, promising them protection and food, and then gradually subordinate their labor, fighters, and lands. What he called the center was supposed to become the core of the future continent. But without freedom, without choice, without an honest alliance? Lin listened to this and felt a cold fury growing inside him. "How many such centers?" he asked. Vault was silent. Lin leaned closer. "How many?" He finally said, 3. The tent became quiet. Kaver slowly exhaled. Yara tightened her grip on the spear. Lin closed his eyes for a second. "So this is no longer a local threat, this is a network. And it has already gone too deep into different lands." He opened his eyes. "Then we go farther." Kaver looked at him. "Where?" Lin answered calmly. "To the center. To the south. To the north. Wherever they are." Yara said quietly, "Do you really want to tear all of this apart?" Lin looked at her. "No, I want to build something better instead." She was silent, then very quietly said, "That is why people follow you." After the swamps, people began speaking of Lin not as a stranger, but as a man who comes and changes everything. In Hera, they awaited him as an advisor, in Sorg as an ally, in the swamps as the one who exposed the rot, in the northern villages as the one who knew how to speak about the future without beautiful empty words. And with every new place, he became not simply smarter, more dangerous, calmer, more precise. Yara no longer asked whether he would ever become great. She saw that it was already happening. One night, when they were returning from the Swamp Council, she asked, "Do you even understand what you have gotten yourself into?" Lin looked at the stars. "Yes, and you are not afraid?" he thought. "I am afraid." She was surprised. "Really? Of course. If you are not afraid of such a road, then you understand nothing." Yara smiled. "And what do you understand?" Lin looked ahead to where the fog was parting over the path. That if hidden centers are already dividing the continent, then someone must come before they break everything. "And will that be you?" Lin did not answer right away. Then he said, "If no one else can." Yara nodded. They walked on. Behind them remained the swamps. Ahead of them were new lands. And somewhere ahead, the great road was already beginning, along which the stranger from the forest would have to walk all the way to the very center of the continent. After the swamps, Lin no longer doubted. Someone across the entire continent was building a system of power that looked like help, but in reality was a trap. He saw similar signs in different places. First, people receive food, then protection, then rules, then debt, then fear of losing everything if they leave. That is how a network works. That is how seizure without open war works. And if before Lin had fought so that one tribe would become stronger, now a task of an entirely different scale stood before him. Not simply to unite people, to preserve their freedom when they unite. This was much more difficult. He returned to Hara in late autumn. The king met him silently, listened to the report, then stood for a long time by the map, which they had gradually been expanding for almost 2 years now, and finally said, "So there are 3 hidden centers." "Yes, and one of them is closer than we thought." Lin nodded. "Yes. Farther south, near the old trade routes. There are the most signs of the network there." The king slowly ran his finger over the map. "We cannot strike everywhere at once. No, then we must choose." Lin looked at the marks. "Not choose. Tear it apart from the edges." Yara, standing by the wall, raised her head. "What does that mean?" Lin answered calmly. "Destroy the source of their safe supplies. Reveal the truth to the people. Make them begin to doubt who is helping them. The king silently nodded. He already understood. Lin did not think like an ordinary warrior, not like a hunter. He thought like someone who built systems and therefore knew how to break them. In spring, Lin went south. This time, not only Yara was with him. Kaver from the swamps, 2 Sorg people, and 1 young craftsman from Hara, whom Lin himself had taught to count supplies and build walkways, joined them. The goal was simple in words and very difficult in practice, to find the first of the 3 centers. The traces led to an old trade road where caravans had once passed between tribes. Now several camps, storehouses, and fortified points stood there, formally for protection and exchange, in reality for control. The closer they came, the more familiar details Lin saw. The same grain system, the same distribution of goods, the same exchange forms, even the same words from the local managers. This is not just trade, Yara said quietly, examining the storehouse on the hill. This is a copy. Lin nodded. Yes, someone is multiplying the same order across different lands. And why? So that everyone depends on one source. Kaver whistled. Too clever for a simple trader. That is why I do not think he is alone, Lin answered. They stood on the hill and looked down at the camp by the road. There were goods, people, guards, exchange signs, and a long table where the local manager sat. Too neat a picture, too correct. When everything is too correct, it usually means something is being hidden. Lin did not begin with an attack. He began with a conversation. First, he sent ordinary people into the camp disguised as traders. They exchanged salt, cloth, and hides, and at the same time found out who managed the storehouse, who signed the lists, and who received more than they should. Then Lin himself entered there with Yara and Kaver. They were met by the manager, a fat, polite, smiling man named Tar. He was too polite, too calm, too confident that everything was under control. How can I help? He asked. Lin looked around the storehouse. We have come to exchange and look at the terms. Tar smiled. Of course, we have the best supplies on the southern road. Lin looked at the forms, at the scales, at the markings, at the guards, and understood that everything here was arranged so that the tribes would never receive the full picture. Show me the lists of past deliveries, he said. Tar smiled a little wider. I am afraid such things are not for everyone. Why? Commercial secret. Yara quietly snorted beside him. Lin looked at Tar calmly. Then you do not have trade, but control. For a second, the manager's smile disappeared, but he quickly brought it back. You are too harsh for a guest, and you are too neat for an honest man. Tar said nothing. But Lin had already understood everything. They had found the first target. At night, Lin did not sleep. He went with Kaver and Yara to the storehouses on the side of the main camp. Too many guards. Too little noise. Too many closed crates. Lin waited for the shift change and then, using his knowledge of the paths and the guards' habits, went around the posts from the rear. Inside were not only goods, there were lists, seals, letters, and most importantly, books with the names of tribes, debts, and temporary obligations. Lin flipped through several pages and went cold. The names were familiar. Hara, Sorg, the swamp villages, small northern settlements, several groups unknown to him. They all had one thing in common: debt, delivery, protection, help, obligation, deadline. A system of subjugation, and at the bottom, a sign. A simple symbol in the form of 3 intersecting lines. Kaver frowned. What is this? Lin looked at the sign for a long time. Probably one of the 3 centers. Yara took one of the books. So they already consider the tribes theirs? Yes, and if we show this to the councils? Lin shook his head. Not everyone will believe paper. We need more. And then he saw one more thing. On the lower shelf lay a separate book, worn, not as neat as the others. He opened it and saw records of people who had disappeared. Not the dead, not the killed. Precisely the disappeared. And it was written there where they were being sent. This is the center, Lin said quietly. Kaver looked over his shoulder. Where? Lin closed the book. To the southeast, in the old stone valley. Yara looked at him. Then that is where we will go. Lin did not answer, because he understood something else. If there was one center there, then there were 2 more in other lands. And if he made a mistake with the first one, the whole network would have time to strengthen. The Stone Valley turned out to be worse than he had expected. On the outside, a simple fortification. Inside, an entire hidden camp where people from different tribes worked. Storehouses, living rows, workshops, common tables, guards, and all of it under the guise of a help center for allied lands. Lin stood on a hill and looked down. There it is, Yara whispered. Kaver clenched his teeth. They are keeping people here? Lin looked more carefully. Yes, and not only that. Here they are turning tribes into dependent neighbors. How do we enter? Asked one of the Sorg people. Lin was silent for a second, then said, Not from the outside. What do you mean? It means there are those inside who already doubt. We need to find them. It was a risky move. Very. But Lin could no longer allow himself to simply attack everything head-on. He sent Yara toward the southern living rows, Kaver to the water storehouses, and went himself with the young craftsman from Hera to the workshops where people from captured tribes worked. It was there that he found the first crack. One of the workers, a thin man with a tired face, recognized him as the stranger from Hara. You? The one who built among the northern people? Lin nodded. Yes? The man looked around. They say that you are dangerous. You destroy order. And what do you think? The worker looked at his hands. I think that if order is held together by hunger and fear, it is not order. Lin felt something click inside. Here it was, that very moment. Not a battle, not sabotage, not a threat, but a person who had already grown tired of believing in lies. Then listen carefully, Lin said quietly. We need the truth. And if you want to get out of here, you will help us open the other's eyes. Everything happened earlier than he had planned. One of the guards noticed Yara. The alarm began. Kaver set fire to a storehouse with damp barrels to block the passage with smoke. The hills were covered with fumes. People began coming out of the workshops. Someone ran, someone froze. Lin understood that now either they would show everyone the truth or they would be cut down one by one. Here, he shouted to the workers. He stood right on the central square and loudly, so that the nearest rows could hear, said, This center does not help you. It keeps you on a leash. Here your names are turned into debts. People froze. The guards rushed toward him, but Yara was already beside him. Show the books, she shouted. Lin raised one of the records in his hand. Here is the proof. He rushed forward and threw the book to the people. One of the workers caught it, opened it, saw his tribe, his debt, his name. And at that moment, something broke. Not in Lin, not in the guards, in the people. Because a lie holds only as long as it is not seen. And once it has been seen, there is no going back. People began to read, whisper, argue, shout. The guards tried to restore order, but it was too late. Lin quickly understood the center was cracking not from a blow, but from the truth. But the center was not empty. When everything was already beginning to collapse, a man appeared in a cloak with gold edging. Short, thin, his face calm, almost friendly. Lin immediately understood this was not a manager, not a guard, not a traitor. This was someone who stood higher. Interesting, the stranger said. So the rumors about you were not exaggerated. Lin raised his gaze to him. And who are you? The man bowed slightly. My name is Emir. I am responsible for the southern node. Lin noticed, even at the moment of collapse, this man did not panic. That was dangerous. Did you build this? Lin asked. Emir calmly answered. I helped unite the weak. With lies, people want to be protected. I simply gave them what they asked for. Lin shook his head. No, you gave them dependence and called it protection. Emir smiled slightly. And yet they are here. For now. Emir glanced at the destroyed storehouse, at the running people, at the smoke. You are too confident in being right. And you are too confident that control is the same as order. Emir thought for a second, then said, Perhaps neither of us is entirely right. Lin did not have time to answer, because Emir sharply raised his hand, and his guards began taking papers, people, and books deeper into the camp. He was not going to fight to the end. He was going to retreat, preserve part of the network, and leave. And that was worse than direct war. Lin rushed after him together with Yara. They forced their way through smoke, screams, falling crates, and rushing people. Kaver blocked one of the exits. The workers to whom Lin had managed to show the books began refusing to obey the guards. Some even helped them. This was no longer an attack. This was an uprising of truth. Emir was leaving through an inner corridor toward the lower shaft. Lin caught up with him at the stone staircase. Stop! Emir turned around. Do you really think you will stop a system that dozens of tribes have already accepted? If it is built on deception, yes. Emir looked at him with something like regret. You still do not understand the scale. And you do not understand that people are not things. For a moment they froze opposite each other. Then Emir stepped back. Today you have defeated only the first node, stranger. Lin stepped forward. Then the next one will be next. Emir smiled. Yes, and it will be better prepared for you than this one. After that he threw a smoke sphere onto the floor and disappeared into the fog of the inner passage. Lin wanted to rush after him, but Yara grabbed his arm. Not now. He looked at her, breathing heavily. She was right. If he chased blindly, he would lose people, and most importantly, he would prove to the enemy that he could be lured out by emotions. Lin clenched his teeth and nodded. After the fall of the southern center, the people did not scatter immediately. That was the most important thing, because they had seen the books, seen the lie, seen that their debts were artificial. But now they needed to hold them together before Ymir returned with a new lie or force. Lin worked without sleep for 2 nights. He organized temporary storehouses, divided people into groups, gave them simple tasks, and immediately said the most important thing. You are not obligated to be here. Whoever wants to leave will leave. Whoever wants to stay will stay. But no one will count you as someone's property anymore. It worked. Someone left. Someone stayed. Someone decided to join Hera. Someone wanted to return to their tribe and tell the truth. And for the first time, Lin saw how a large system breaks not from an army, but from the fact that people stop being afraid to leave. Yara came over to him at dawn. Are you satisfied? Lin tiredly sat down on a stone. No. Why? Because this is only one center. She silently sat beside him. Do you still want to go farther? Yes, even after this? He looked at the misty dawn over the valley, especially after this. Yara looked at him for a long time, then quietly said, Then you are becoming what they feared from the very beginning. Lin smiled without joy. And what is that? She looked straight at him. A man who will teach the tribes to be free. On the way home, Lin thought about only one thing. Ymir had told the truth. The center was not the only one. The southern node was only part of the network. 1 of 3. And that meant 2 more lay ahead. And somewhere there, in other lands, other people were already building traps, not knowing that the stranger from the forest had learned to see their system through and through. In the evening, already on the border of Hera, Yara walked beside him and asked, Are you tired? Lin answered honestly, Very. Then why do you go farther? He looked ahead. Because if not me, then who? Yara said nothing. She only walked a little closer beside him. And somewhere far ahead, a new chapter was already beginning. A clash with the second center, which, according to rumors, was far more dangerous than the southern one. And if the south built false protection, then the north perhaps was building something far more terrible. Lin did not yet know exactly what, but he already knew the main thing. He would not stop.